Okay, so today we will be discussing Pierre Bourdieu. I should warn you that this is one of the more difficult lectures to understand. I was not sure if I would include Bourdieu in this class. He's, kind of for more advanced readers than maybe an introduction class, but I figured that he's important enough to include, and even if it comes with a little bit of struggling with the way he writes, which is notorious for being impossible to penetrate for English readers in particular. Um, Even with these challenges, I think it's still worth a try. So bear with me as I discuss Pierre Bourdieu. Okay, so he was born on August 1st, 1930 in southern France. He was a French sociologist focused on dynamics of power, and his work has been particularly relied upon in works on cultural sociology. In fact, he is one of the most frequently cited sociologists. There was recently a study in the journal The American Sociologist showing the most frequently cited sociologists between 1970 and 2010. And in 2010, Pierre Bourdieu was cited more than any other sociologist. He would die of cancer in 2002. Bourdieu was originally trained as an anthropologist before he switched over to sociology. He made the case that both structure and action are essential to any specified theory. We'll unpack a bit more about what that means. It's related, I should say, to the relationship between the substructure and the superstructure as put forward by Max Weber in his kind of his correction to Marx's understanding of the relationship between the super and substructure. Bourdieu tells us that structures are both structuring and structured. He speaks in this manner quite a bit to try to emphasize the dialectical nature of relationships rather than the unidirectional nature of the relationships. Structuring, he says, refers to factors that guide and constrain action. Those structures can also be structured already in that they are generated and reproduced by actors. So there is by dialectic, a mutual influence between structure and action at play here. Although structures do guide and confound action, actions also generate and reproduce structure. In regard to relational analysis, Bourdieu makes the case that tastes and practices are organized by actors' positions within a particular social space and how those positions relate to one another in a social space. Relational analysis revolves around positions, position taking, and disposition, or habitus, as he puts it. Actors occupy positions which can be defined by occupation, education, or proximity to power, and people define themselves through their positions and the social status held by such positions. Position taking is referring to choices that people make that could signal their positions, cues of their social status. That could be signaled to others in symbolic terms. So the way they dress, their taste in art, how they engage in leisure, and the sort of symbolic ways in which these types of preferences and activities correspond to prestige or class. And then lastly, habitus is the collection of dispositions that are shaped by experiences of actors in positions in the social structure. I'll get a little bit more into habitus later in this lecture. As habitus refers to a collection of dispositions, it is something that is deeply rooted within individuals, something that is very difficult to define in empirical terms. It allows for a great deal of improvisation, and they are essentially loose confines of behavior that one is not totally aware of. Those who occupy similar positions will have similar forms of habitus, so says Bourdieu. Bourdieu also has this notion of fields. A social field is a domain of social life that has its own rules of organization. It leads to a particular sense of positions and supports practices associated with them. Fields are the domains within which individuals take positions and relate to one another on the basis of the position taken. Bourdieu is well known for unpacking different forms of capital. Some say that this type of idea had been many times expressed by others before, and that Bourdieu is maybe getting credit for something that he just kind of called something else. But I have some sympathy for that mindset, especially as somebody who's from the Weberian tradition. Nevertheless, we'll go over some of the forms of capital as put forth by Bourdieu. Economic capital, of course, refers to possession, control, or proximity to wealth and property. Cultural capital is symbolic in form. It does not refer to tangible resources, but rather designates prestige, usually associated with high educational achievement. There's also social capital, which is based on social connections with others in light of their positions and the prestige of their positions. And then there's also symbolic capital, which refers to the actor's ability to use practices as symbols or signals in order to claim and maintain positions. Symbolic capital, social capital, cultural capital, and economic capital are at least in part transferable. Okay, now we are going to turn to the figure that Bourdieu provides us, that being figure 19.1. As you will see, it's titled The Space of Social Positions and the Space of Lifestyles. The dotted line indicates probable orientation toward the right or left. You have a political aspect to it, vote for the right, vote for the left. You also have capital, cultural capital, and economic capital. And as you look throughout these intersecting axes, you find both different types of occupations that tend to be associated with whether or not one has cultural capital or lack thereof, or if they have economic capital and the lack thereof. There's also the political orientation that's intersecting with this. And if you take a deep look at some of these positions and these leisurely activities, and this would maybe give a better sense. I know that Bourdieu can be rather complicated and maybe even intentionally complicated from his perspective, but this puts it into more sort of concrete terms, and this figure might be helpful in making sense of some of what he's getting at here. I'm going to read a segment from page 271 where Bourdieu writes, "Thus, in the first dimension, which is undoubtedly the most important, the holders of a great volume of overall capital, such as industrial employers, members of liberal professions, and university professors, are opposed in the mass to those who are most deprived of economic and cultural capital, such as unskilled workers. But from another point of view, that is, from the point of view of the relative weight of economic capital and cultural capital in their patrimony, professors relatively wealthier in cultural capital than in economic capital are strongly opposed to industrial employers, relatively wealthier in economic capital than in cultural capital." So there are different types of capital to be cognizant of, both in terms of one's occupation, both in terms of how one signals their particular form of capital, not only through occupation, but also through leisurely activities, etc., etc. To each class of positions, there's a corresponding class of habitus, again, collection of dispositions that are both conditioned and conditioning. Produced by the social conditioning, habitus are differentiated and they are also differentiating. Again, we have this dialectic implied by the two ways in which habitus is presented here. They differentiate, but they are also differentiated. What the worker eats and the way he eats them, what one's political opinion is and how she expresses it, corresponds to different types and different specificities within our understanding of capital. It's quite clear that the same behavior or the same good can appear distinguished to one person, pretentious to someone else, and cheap or showy to another. This kind of gives us a glimpse into the fact that it's not anything to do with the objective character of that behavior or the objective character of that good necessarily. It could partially be that, but largely the way in which a particular behavior or a particular good is interpreted is through the mediating social constructionist lens of the dialectic of the various forms of capital that are in dialectical relationship with one another. The conditions associated with a particular class of conditions of existence produce habitus. Again, durable, transferable dispositions which are structured structures, he says, predisposed to function as structuring structures. If you find this confusing, it's perfectly normal. Even Bourdieu, in a lecture of his, once prefaced his lecture by saying that he will maybe sound both confused and confusing. So at least there's a bit of self-awareness as to how absurd he sounds at times. Though this absurdity is not just for the sake of style, maybe a little bit of style, but not just for the sake of style, but actually, genuinely conveys the type of dialectic that Bourdieu is trying to show us. Habitus, he says, is a product of history, but it also produces individual and collective practices, i.e. more history. There's an internalization of externality. So again, when we talk about the ways in which structures are formed and the way they relate to action, we cannot understand just action as being just the outcome of structure. Again, when Marx put forward this sort of relation where the substructure is just the sole basis and not affected by the superstructure, Weber does not flip this on his head, but rather provides an addition showing that substructure can affect the superstructure, yet the superstructure can also affect the substructure. Pierre Bourdieu, who I did not have time to squeeze into this introduction to sociology class, also has this sort of internalization, externalization, objectivation, a very complicated relationship that is essential to understanding the social world. I figured Bourdieu and Bourdieu would be not particularly nice for me to include an introduction to sociology, so I kept it to Bourdieu in terms of, and Weber, of course, in terms of dialectical relationships within social analysis. So he has this case where he refers to it as illusion of hindsight, to have an understanding of social life as being just the essence that preceded them. So again, this really is just parroting Weber, in my view. I said it to begin the lecture, but it's again in the same way that Weber in The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism was providing a correction to crude historical materialism, that meaning Marx's view on how substructure and superstructure relate to one another. Bourdieu is doing more of that without really, just with using kind of different terms. The social world is defined and redefined in dialectic between the objectifying intention and the already objectified intention. And then he quotes from Emil Durkheim on page 281 in my version. Apologies, I think that I was trying to find the PDFs of all of the readings for you, and I found the PDF for this one, though I do think, if I'm not mistaken, that the page numbers might not correspond to this. So if you do look through your reading on structures, habitus, and practices, however, it looks 1, 2, 3, just about 5 pages in. You'll see a big block of text from Durkheim, and that's where I'm reading from. 281 in my version, if you happen to have that. In each one of us, in differing degrees, is contained the person we were yesterday. And indeed, in the nature of things, it is even true that our past persona predominate in us, since the present is necessarily insignificant when compared with the long period of the past, because of which we have emerged in the form we have today. It is just that we don't directly feel the influence of these past selves, precisely because they are so deeply rooted within us. They constitute the unconscious part of ourselves. Consequently, we have a strong tendency not to recognize their existence and to ignore their legitimate demands. By contrast with the most recent acquisitions of civilization, we are vividly aware of them just because they are recent and consequently have not had time to be assimilated into our collective unconscious. So, speaking in rather strong terms, Bourdieu says that it is only in folklore, meaning it is not a real part of society, but rather imaginary, to say that the social world can be seen as a universe of possibles, equally possible for any possible subject. overly complicated way of saying it, of course, but it is to say that every human being cannot have is not going to be led to the same is not going to have the same set of possibilities in their lives, given the complex web of relations as we have here put them. Rights to the future defined by law. There's a nearly monopolistic right to certain possibles that come out of power relations. The ways in which the various forms of capital integrate with one another within the complex web of how they can both be structured and structuring. Curtails certain sets of behaviors and possibilities for individuals in ways that it does not for others, on the basis of both practices and positions and habitus. Lastly, I ask that you please watch this documentary on Pierre Bourdieu. If you would like, you can write a one-page summary of this documentary. I will add it as a possible extra credit opportunity. You could send me a one-page summary, Times New Roman, 12-point font, double spaced on this documentary, and I will add a point to your final grade. Thank you.